So, hello everybody. We're live from EduCause, and we are connecting today with Amy and Kristen, and with Alan as our on-site buddy. I'm Mandy Honeyman. Hello, I'm your virtual buddy. And I'm now going to go around and ask everybody just to introduce themselves briefly. So I'm going to start with Maha. I'm going to go to you, Maha.
Okay, my name is Maha Abdelmanem. I'm connecting from Cairo, Egypt. I am a trainer, coach. I love everything to do with learning, and that's why I hang around with educators.
And now I'm going to come to Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Murphy. I'm the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College.
Fantastic. And Helen.
Good morning. I'm Helen DeWard, located in the Aurelia, Central Ontario area of Canada. I work at the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University.
Okay. And I haven't got a picture for Christy, so I'm going to go to Chris.
Hello, I'm Chris Gilliard. I'm from Detroit, and I'm an English professor at Macomb Community College.
And now I'm going to go to Alan.
I'm Alan Pike. I'm the Digital Scholarship Training Coordinator at Emory University in Atlanta.
Fantastic. And I'm going to go quickly back to Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca Hogue, co-founder of Virtually Connecting, and so happy to see so many familiar faces on board today. And I'm in Santa Clara, California, and it's not quite sunny yet because the sun's not up.
Yeah, it is. It's really dark out on this side of this side of America. It really is. So I'm going to come to Christy when I see her picture again. I can't see her, so I'm going to come to you three. So, Kristen, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at the conference as well?
Yeah, I'm Kristen Eshleman. I'm Director of Digital Learning, Research and Design. I'm doing a new R&D role at Davidson. I'm here because I'm presenting on the MOOC experiments that we've done over the past couple of years at Davidson in a hybrid format, talking a little bit about the research and where we're heading with that in the future with a collaboration among 3 other liberal arts colleges, so Hamilton, Colgate, and Wellesley, in addition to Davidson. So I'm here for the same reasons I go to all these conferences, really, is to have this informal time with people like Amy and Alan and all the good stuff that happens on the edges of conferences. It's been a good one so far. I haven't been able to attend as many meetings as I'd like, but it's been great having these conversations on the side. And Amy and I have a little thing brewing around resistance and marginality, which we'll talk a little bit about. But that's my intro. Amy?
I'm Amy Collier. I am Associate Provost for Digital Learning at Middlebury College. It's a fairly new post. Prior to that, I was at Stanford as the Director of Digital Learning Initiatives for about 4 years. And I'm here at the conference, I don't know. I'm faculty at the Learning Technology Leadership Program for EduCause, and one of the requirements that they have to be a faculty member is that you have to go to EduCause every year for 3 years. So
obligatory.
Obligatory, but I'm pleased to be at this conference. It's always a ton of fun. And I am co-presenting on a panel with Adam Finkelstein and Josh Kim about the future of residential-based learning at campuses that are primarily research institutions. When I was at Stanford, I could talk about that. Now I'm at a totally residential, small liberal arts college. It's a little different, but certainly bringing a perspective about how to lead change at a variety of different kinds of institutions, particularly from a place where you don't have a ton of power, which is where I was at Stanford. So that was kind of the original intent of the presentation.
And now she has power.
Now I have tons of power. I'm all power.
Radiating power.
It's all about power now.
That's why I want to talk about originality so much.
I'm affiliated with myself. I'm from the internet, and just here to drop in on the conference. I was almost going to crash the conference, but someone got me a badge.
Nice.
So
that's nice.
I'm official, and just getting to reconnect with people. And, off on the wings there, we also have John Becker and Tom Woodward from VCU, who maybe I'll coax to come on in the camera. So we're just.
We saw him.
we're in the hallway of the big convention center, and we're having a conversation like we do in the hallways, except it's with you guys out there all over the world.
That's fantastic. Okay, let me just bring in Christy, who's
been there twice. There you go.
Who is now here? Hi,
Christy.
No, we haven't got your mic yet. Your mic's not turned on. Okay, so we'll come. Turn your mic on.
How about now?
We can hear you.
Excellent. This is the third device. I'm so sorry for the delay. Good morning, all. Good afternoon. I don't know what time it is there. I'm Christy Ford. I'm at the University of Maryland, University College, and I met some wonderful folks a couple of weeks ago at Stanford through a D-Learn conference, and we had some really engaging conversations, so I'm glad to be here this morning.
It's really good to see you.
Welcome. Okay, so I'm gonna put these guys back center stage. We were talking a bit about MOOCs, weren't we, Alan? Because we thought earlier. So wondering just how many of us here are actually doing MOOCs at the moment? How many of it? Because it always. How many of us are going to finish those MOOCs?
Well, I say it depends on whether you call the whole National Writing Month thing a MOOC, because that's the whole thing. That November is National Writing Month on 8 different fronts, right? So whether you're a novel writer, an academic writer, or a blog writer, or I'm sure there's others out there. And so I don't know whether you call that a MOOC or not.
Why would you want to? I mean, it's a great thing. I mean, why does it need that as a label?
Right.
I mean, I'm being serious. I mean, it's
a
fabulous thing. But it's not a course. It's kind of an event. It's a happening.
It's a happening.
And how do you define complete?
How do I define complete? Get to the end of. Sorry, yeah.
Well, there's the definition of get what you want out of, too, right?
Well, yeah, but that's different. Then I'd say who's going to get what they want out of it rather than get. I mean, I don't think we should need to be shy about this. I mean, most people don't complete. I don't know about anybody else. I dip into those that look interesting just to see how they're structured and how they've been written, and then I go off and do my own thing, you know. But it's only we were talking about this with Alan, and it just seemed as though there are lots of MOOCs which there's certain MOOCs which I know I'm going to complete. So I was just curious about how other people were feeling about that, and also what Kristen had to say about whatever's coming out of the.
Well, I mean, the session yesterday was really interesting for the small college perspective. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, for us, and Joe Murphy is at Kenyon, so he'll understand this, I think. But for us, the MOOC experiment is really not about the MOOC so much at all. It's about the ways we like to use ed tech to push against our own value assumptions, and that's what I love about it. I'm not in it to put courses online. We're not in it to go completely digital. We really like the way these tools start to expose on our own campuses what it is we're doing well and what we're not doing so well. And I think until we leap into those experiments, we just are running our curriculum on a lot of assumptions. So I like that. I like that it's a lens into sort of a critical pedagogy approach to teaching and learning, and something that we haven't been in the habit of doing in small liberal arts colleges.
I think even at a research institution like Emory, we often see that this past summer was the first summer we ran online classes at all, and we really noticed it forced faculty to do exactly what you said, really think through what it is they're doing in the classroom, and what's the function of all my assignments, how does this fit into the curriculum, and these kind of questions that I think people have in their brains, but they don't necessarily ask in a real critical, thoughtful, deliberate way, face-to-face.
We had at breakfast this morning was I kind of in some ways resent the fact that it was MOOCs that caused us to think this way, right? Because I was before at Stanford, I was a director for Center for Teaching looking at Texas Wesleyan University that had a big mandate to go to put a lot of things online, and just putting courses online in itself asked those kinds of questions that you were just asking about. How do I transform my pedagogy? How do I think about designing something that is intended to be in a digital space rather than a physical space, or in some combination of both? And it doesn't take MOOCs to do that, but it seems like the conversation can often happen because of MOOCs at places where online learning was seen as not part of what we do up to this point, right?
Yeah, and I would just add to Amy's thoughts that in many cases where people are doing MOOCs, especially in the case of small liberal arts colleges where we don't have graduate schools of education and the capacity to do research, if you don't do that research piece, you really don't get a good sense of what's working well and what isn't. What came out of our experiment that was interesting is two paradoxes when we did the case study of hybrid MOOCs. So I'm talking about researching Davidson students' perspectives on the MOOC experiment and hybrid learning. And in both cases, there's two courses, both cases, our students indicated, well, we had, I think the outcomes were really questions about rigor and whether or not what we do in our residential courses is rigor or time management, and where are we hitting these diminishing returns with rigor. So in both cases, we lowered the rigor of these courses to incorporate the MOOCs. But outcomes from the student perspective and from the faculty perspective were the same or better than past Davidson courses or similar Davidson courses. At the same time, they kept indicating that the MOOC was less rigorous. Same thing around the issue of implicit bias in the mode of delivery. So I think, again, it's a sort of an elitist power issue on our campuses.
Totally.
If I'm paying $50,000 a year for this education that's high touch, face-to-face, therefore it must be better than anything else, and not recognizing that elements of digital infused into that hybrid course actually made the experience better, but they could not connect the dots. So those were two interesting, where is rigor really happening on our campus, and do we have an implicit bias problem?
Well, the question of what is rigor anyway on our campuses, I think, is pretty interesting, right? I think each of our campuses would probably define it a little bit differently, and I think it speaks to what we value at our institutions, that then how much we're willing to replace for the sake of giving up rigor or not. So at Middlebury, for instance, rigor is often associated with immersive learning experiences, really in-depth, going into a way of thinking about something in a really immersive way. Whether that's our language schools where people speak a language for, essentially 3 months at a time, only that language that they're studying, that's immersive. And so that level of rigor to them is a value that they are unwilling to give up. And that's how they define rigor. And so that's one of those core values, again, that I think if you said now bring some online piece to it, it's going to be really difficult to make that exchange or make that case for it.
Mm-hmm.
Let me jump in here in terms of the MOOC piece, because I think I was at UMUC having open access, having 85,000 students, veterans, adults. We really thought about, we don't do MOOCs, but one of the things that I like that MOOCs make you think about is the ill-defined problems that we have in education. So as we talk about rigor, we all determine what research is and how it looks a little different. So for us, it's really about action research and using the lens of the ill-defined problems that come up as you're trying to conceptualize a MOOC has really helped us to be a lot more strategic in terms of our thinking and really trying to push the boundaries of the innovation process, how we scale. Those things are really huge for us.
Yeah, I agree. We were talking about participatory action research methods as well, and how that gives a voice to practitioners and to students and to decision making in a way that I think other forms of research don't. So I agree with you. It's more of a bottom-up approach to change in higher education than what we've typically seen, which is administrators saying, all right, you're going to do blended learning or you're going to do MOOCs, now go. And I just think that's going to be met with more resistance than meaningful change.
And that goes to Rebecca's question about what did we take from DLearn that we brought to EDUCAUSE, and that's certainly the conversations that we all had with Christy, or that Kristen and I had with Christy at DLearn, was around this kind of notion of participatory action research as a way to make sure that we're not kind of imposing our values on everything that happens when it comes to instructional decisions and strategic decisions, but that through participatory action research, which is research that engages it intends for change. So action piece is that you're intending to actually change something, not just understand it, but also change it where it makes sense to change. And the participatory is to bring the people in who will be affected by that change, or for whom that change is intended, to actually determine what the change will be. And that, I think, it's not a paradigm that we use a lot at our institutions, and yet students are the people for whom we should be or that we should be bringing into these conversations. And so that, participatory action research, I think, is a thread.
And I'm somebody on the spot, one of the virtual buddies, one of the attendees. So Chris Gilliard's on the line, and he was at DLearn as well. And he's doing an interesting study on digital redlining, and I'm beginning to wonder now, Chris. I wonder if you don't mind talking about this, where action research might play a role in the issues you're seeing around the trust relationship problem between administrations and institutions in terms of IT policy. I don't know if Chris is willing to talk about that.
Well, could you give me, I'm not sure I know what you mean when you say action research.
So, I'm trying to think in your example, it would be identifying a specific problem that you want to address, and then doing the research sort of as you're addressing the problem. You're just redesigning, you're iterating solutions, continuing to research, continuing to refine. Are there ways that kind of research method, and Christy can explain it better than I can, I'm new to it, could maybe inform the kind of research you and I are thinking about trying to do more broadly, given what you've seen?
Well, really briefly, what I did at DLearn was, what my colleague and I did was, we talked about the acceptable use policy at our college, and we looked at several other colleges, basically from community college on up. We've looked at about 15 or something like that, but what we found, stemming from looking at our place, is that I'm trying to think of the polite way to say this, but typically colleges with students of lower socioeconomic status have more restrictive acceptable use policies, and what we think is that, and also those happen to be places where students have access issues. A lot of them only have mobile access. They only have access on campus. So essentially, it restricts them from doing a lot of the work that students would need to do in order to sort of forward their knowledge. So in answer to the question about action research, what we're doing right now is trying to, we've been trying to bridge that gap between CIO, Chief Information Officer, administration, provost, things like that, and faculty, and figure out sort of, it seems that people typically have the same desires, the same idea of who their constituents are and what they want, but the ways of getting at that are very different. And we're trying to help change that top-down model to one of more of education.
Yeah, and I really like the presentation was taking an interesting discussion turn around. To what extent are these restrictive policies impacting student learning? And if we're not having more openness, more trust between IT administration, IT policies, digital access, all of these, are we negatively impacting student agency to the point where it's going to be a problem in the learning environment? And I think it's an interesting study that we want to pursue with EDUCAUSE, which part of the reason I'm here is to talk about that too, with some of the EDUCAUSE leaders, to see if we can move this more broadly based on what Chris has already done, and then take a leading role in, where are IT policies impacting student agency on our campuses. I could just see action research maybe playing a role there. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'd love to explore it with anyone who's interested.
I would say it even goes beyond policy a little bit, and the technologies that we often adopt, or the value systems of the technologies that we adopt at different institutions, say a lot about what we think about students' agency and their ability to, or where we want them to end up at the end of their educational experience with us. And I think that's something we can't let go. I think that's something, again, when we bring the notion of participatory action research into this, it empowers the student to have agency and ownership of where they end up and to have a voice. In some ways, we were talking about this at DLearn too, we kind of keep taking that away from them because we think, well, it's just, student success looks like X, and so let's help students to get to point X, and then that's it, and then they've successfully completed, versus saying to them, be part of figuring out where we're going, where you're going, what this institution is doing. Why is that something that only kids at elite schools get to have?
Right.
There was a session yesterday on whether there's too much or too little personalization. Interestingly sponsored by Genzabar, but actually they didn't have a say in the conversation. But I was just wondering, like, and they're talking about things like, they're measuring how many times students visit a library, whether that tells you anything. But I mean, do students know what information is being gathered on them for those monitoring purposes? Which some are very good, but where's the transparency on that?
Right. Yeah, and that's where the personal API project could be really interesting and something for educators to get behind and support more institutions trying to build. So that's a policy around giving students access, opening up a hole to all the data we collect about them, and letting them take that data and visualize it and sort of figure out their own patterns in learning that maybe we're not able to present to them right now. So I'm really interested in seeing where that particular project goes.
How many of us would say that institutions have policies around technologies that give students all the information they need to know about what kinds of data we're collecting? Do we have examples of that?
Yeah, I just want to talk, because I was talking to Chris about this at DLRN actually, because I was part of a Guardian chat about data analytics, and JISC were there, and they did a presentation I think yesterday at the conference, and I was just trying to find their slideshow, but they did a really interesting thing, and one of the aspects of that is a little app which they are producing for students to understand their own the data that will help them to learn themselves. So kind of like Fitbit for learning, and they also have within that, because you would just for how to manage that trust relationship as well. So that might be something worth looking at. Sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, well, I didn't know if you needed to acknowledge me. One of the things I do, I teach composition, basic composition and research writing, and a lot of times we focus our class on these issues, and I get students to think about them, because I don't know, well, at least at my institution, they're not having those conversations in other classes. So that's one way. And so far they've been really receptive and really interested.
Yeah, and how can IT support that, right? So you're talking about it in your class. How can we maybe give students some of this access to begin playing with it and get their hands dirty?
That's a great question.
A terms of service didn't read website for all of our institutions, right? Where essentially it explains all the terms of services, all the tools that we use to track your data as a student. That would be transparency that I don't think any administrator I've ever worked with would have.
And as many people will read those as read the other terms of service.
Well, but I mean, the TOSDR is kind of like, it's intended to be really, really easy to understand through visualizations, and then you can dig deeper.
I don't know. My feeling is that is actually one of the skills for learning that needs to be taught while students are preparing to go to college. So almost at school. So we expect a certain standard of literacy. We expect a certain standard of numeracy. Well, they need to have a certain standard of digital literacy, and one really important aspect of that is that they need to understand what happens to their own data. And if they don't understand that, then they can't engage in our society now.
Yeah.
But
Sorry,
this is going.
I wanted to sort of loop around a little bit because this discussion, the minute you said Fitbit, it occurs to me the relationship between the quantified self movement. And in some ways, it might be a great partnering with quantified self and education analytics. Like this might be a great two sort of organizations to bring into the same, or movements into the same space, so that the quantified self folks can work with the learning analytics folks to create views, as it were, of what my learning looks like and that kind of stuff. Just I wondered if anybody's actually had any interaction with sort of that movement.
I'm unfamiliar. Do you
with the quantified movement? Yeah, a little bit. So it's the data that your machines collect, like your Fitbit, things like that tell you about certain kinds of patterns of behavior. But again, I think one of the interesting things we should pair with that kind of approach is to also say, well, that quantified self, or that image of self provided by data of these things that are being collected, is only a small representation of who we actually are, and how to tell our own narrative within a framework of, this is what the internet says about me, or this is what the tools that my school collects about me says about me. Now how do I tell the story of who I really am and what my learning really looks like? That, I think, is again, that bigger skill that a lot of our institutions are not getting to.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think that's an important point, because as we talk about personalized learning, right now we haven't figured out a way to move.
Bring in a guest.
Hello. Go ahead, Christy. Sorry.
Oh, I said I think it's a really good point, because as we think about personalized learning, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we think about personalized learning, we are not able to do a really great job of moving past content. So we're not able to really be more thoughtful about creating personalized learning environments where students are not just focused on how they did on a quiz. I mean, I think this is a larger movement that we're talking about, and I think that these type of initiatives really give student agency to be able to be a lot more transparent of the entire learning process.
Well, and that's part of why I jumped in here, right? The quantified self stuff, the aspect that I'm fascinated by is the ability to personalize different goals and then to build tools around those goals and to do what you want. And it's really the pattern of thought mixed with the technology to kind of like back it up. And so we're dallying on some of the edges there with some of the stuff we're doing, but by doing stuff in the open with open source stuff, that personalized API idea, it's not just what we give them, but how are we kind of empowering them to think through this stuff on their own and build the tools they would need to be reflective about their own learning. So not just like, while you're here, we'll give you this Fitbit and this thing, and you can think about this in the ways and the channels which we provide, but going forward forever and ever, how do you think about all this stuff, and how do you build things to support that kind of thinking and measure your progress in whatever way you see appropriate?
And who are you?
Do we want Tom to introduce
I'm
himself?
Tom.
Hi.
Hi.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I think we lost your sound just then. Just say. Introduce yourself again.
I'm from Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU. So I hang out with Alan frequently and Gardner Campbell. Down back with people like that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. So I'm aware that we've been on for half an hour, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone's okay with carrying on and are happy.
May I jump in for a minute before
Please do,
or I have to run. I'm not very familiar with all the research that you've been talking about, but it sounds fascinating, and it's a learning for me. But it all reminds me of something that I came to experience at the beginning of 2012 because of for a course about teaching and learning in virtual worlds and games. I tried a game. Video game, and that is World of Warcraft. As a trainer, I could see a lot of things. Until today, I still play the game. I used to hate video games, but I like this one, and I stuck with it. But one of the things that as I'm learning is always on my mind is performance management, and what you've been doing. I mean, from a corporate point of view, but what you've been talking about reminds me also of performance management, but for students. And in performance management, big organizations have been moving towards having a shared vision, a shared way of setting goals, shared, and so on. So everybody gets involved. It's not a top-down. It's everybody joins in. And World of Warcraft dashboard for each player is incredible, and I keep thinking that if you can move something like that into an organization and try and make it work or see how it fits with their vision, mission, and organizational goals and every personal individual's goal, it would be fantastic. I don't know how that can be useful to any of you, but I just wanted to tell you that this is something that I've never, for the last 3 years, I've never ever played even for half an hour without that game without thinking of performance management.
Wow, that's yeah, I'm gonna go.
Because it allows every player to see every single achievement that they can reach. And they decide for themselves when and where and how they are going to reach it, either on their own, or they ask for help, or they go and see a video about how others have been able to achieve. And that's how I got, succeeded in achieving some of the goals that I wanted to achieve in the game, because I'm not a super player. I'm not a core gamer. I'm a slow achiever in the game. But I was able to do it by watching, by learning, by asking for help, but on my own time and my own goals. There are goals that don't interest me at all, or they are in my future, not immediate, and so on. So I think both for students, and I'm always for also thinking as a learner, I can't forget my experience as a student. It's always with me.
There's a lot
so that's it. Thank you.
Well,
I can't hear you, Alan.
Yeah, that's the key thing.
I couldn't hear that. Yeah, Alan, say that again.
Well, it's a lot about teamwork, collaboration, real time, synchronous communication, and planning.
That's an area where Kenyon's trying to do some work, and I think we're getting there. That a lot of the quantified stuff that I'm familiar with is mostly providing data for reflection. You took this many steps, you did this many exercises, your health numbers were whatever. And I think an interesting question, particularly as we think about it in education, is how are we going to link those up with planning tools that allow people to, as Maha talks about, identify goals and find paths to them, or are there other, just integration with a calendar? Just something that says, I will do this thing at this time. What are the planning tools that we can integrate with all of that data, so that people aren't just saying, I happen to take this many steps today, but I made time to walk at this time, or to read, or to practice or learn.
But also, Joe, what interested me and what Alan just said is how this tool might algorithmically connect you to other people who could help you achieve those goals in ways that an algorithm can't do on its own.
I'm really shocked by the power of getting thumbs up from completely random strangers on Fitocracy to get me back to the gym. I'm shocked that works, but it does.
So as I'm listening to you talk, one of the things that comes up for me, I teach online psychology courses, and for years I struggle with how do I get students to be more successful when they're never in the environment, right? They're not logging onto the LMS system. I know it's a time management issue. This seems like a solution to be able to not only empower learners to be more engaged in their learning and be more actively in charge of their learning, but some of those things that we've never been able to figure out in terms of time management, some of the things that come with the lack of grit, those types of things, I think this has some real value that I just had an aha moment as you all were talking.
There's this tension, right, between kind of who were we talking yesterday who was like, all I'm doing is I keep pressing the button so I'll get that badge, right? I'll walk in circles for a few minutes to get to my 10,000, right? So I can get that badge that tells me something or other. And I think there's an interesting kind of double-edged sword here, which is that in some ways these analytics can become these kind of Campbell's law, the kinds of things that you aim towards because you're gaming, right? You're kind of trying to game the system, right? Like, I remember before I went to bed one night, I jumped around in my room until I got to 10,000 steps, right? That's actually not health, right? That's gaming the system. That's trying to win. Versus what you were talking about, and I think I forget who was saying it. Maybe Tom maybe was saying that. Joe was saying that these things can be used for reflection, for thinking about how I do things within a larger context, and those are not easy things to make sense of.
Yeah, good
for
point.
students,
Yeah,
for us.
I did.
But Amy, you jumping in your room is still better than doing nothing. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I felt like a jerk.
Well, I lived through, when I was in K-12, we were doing a lot of stuff with learning management systems and the idea of algorithmically derived customized curriculum and all that stuff, and the idea of what do these dashboards look like for students. And one of the interesting things to see is, for most part, it is these simple things. Like, a lot of times it's binary, either you're in the red or the green, or occasionally they'll venture in to give you a yellow. You know what I mean? Like, so it's it's boxing learning in some really unfortunate ways, and then it's once you got the green, you're done. You've achieved that. Never think of it again, move on, you know. So there were some more interesting ones that would do things like, if you're writing a research paper, you could log, like, I'm doing this type of research right now, and see like how it balanced out. So it'd chart, like, you spent 3.6 hours researching this aspect of your paper, or this aspect. You know, you did these number of revisions, you could play it out in different ways. And those things, I think, started to get at like a more sophisticated picture that would get at the reflection you're talking about. So it's that delicate line between badges that keep you going, maybe, and simple goals and steps to a process, but indicating that process doesn't necessarily end, and it's a continuous thing that you need to reflect on. It's messy.
I mean, I was thinking about Maha's World of Warcraft example, and how she said, you know, there are these goals that they've kind of predetermined. I can do any of them, and I can do them whenever I want, but they're kind of predetermined, right? And I think, I don't know, I've never played it, but I think they're, you know, you can, if you become a more expert gamer, you can actually create your own and decide what you're going to do. But I do think, you know, there are the neatly packaged goals and the neatly packaged things that tell you how close you are to those goals. Again, it kind of gets us into pushing away from what a truly educated person is, who is somebody who kind of looks at the world and says, okay, now what's my goal? Okay, now that I've gotten to this point, you know, based on my experience, based on who I am and what I'm trying to do, now what are my goals? And I think that's a very different perspective than some of the analytics packages that we're talking about.
Yeah,
and maybe the connection with Daniel Pink's yesterday about
right.
Not always big motivations motivate people.
Right.
So, I mean, World of Warcraft, it's the pursuit, it's reputation, it's being public. We're talking about bigger goals, we're talking about your education. So,
right.
I mean, it's a different motivation scheme.
That's true.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. There are aspects of it is that it's dictated, and that's part of why I, for example, from a virtual world's point of view, I prefer the virtual worlds to the game. And I've always, for example, I mean, in that field, I feel that a mixture of both would be wonderful, because you have the freedom of setting your own goals and doing your thing, learning your own way, but also you have the structured side if you want, if that's what helps. Anyways, thank you very much for having me and for listening, and it was very thought-provoking. There's a lot to think about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for
I have to run.
Thanks, Maha. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, Rebecca asked a bit earlier if we could come back to thinking about action research and participatory research. I'm not quite sure if there's a difference between those. Is participatory is when you're involving the students much more, right? Okay, and how they also. Her question was how could that be incorporated into masters and PhD research?
How would I jump in? I'll I can tell you a little bit about sort of
ask your own question, Rebecca.
Yeah, action research versus participatory action research. Participatory draws more on the critical theorist paradigm, where action research without the P is more of a pragmatic practice. So you may be working with teachers, but it's not as much about agency if it's just action research. Participatory action research is much more about agency, and you're often dealing with a population that is not seen as having their agency. And so in this case, students not having agency, so you're dealing with that aspect of it. So those are sort of the differences, but I guess my question is, one of the challenges I ran into, I did action research in my master's and then went on to a PhD program where participatory action research wasn't seen as, or was not looked upon as sort of a valid method, a rigorous method of study, and a way in which to approach research. And you had to challenge barriers if you wanted to go down that path. There was also not an understanding between the differences between the two. But I'm wondering, you know, for anybody that's in a more senior position, what can you do, or how can we help this so that more people can approach this type of research earlier in their careers?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, part of it is having people in leadership positions who value these kinds of methodologies, right? I mean, I feel like part of what one of my goals at Stanford when I was there was just to kind of keep bringing the perspective of, hey, look, you know, we've got this analytics group of students, and all they're really focused on is analytics, learning analytics. That's great, but where are the perspectives that are critical? Where are the perspectives that are these other lenses? And so I felt like that was my job. I'm sure I sound like a broken record most days. I was like, hey, can we not forget, you know, that this is very limited, that every research approach is subjective, does have bias. And so it's because what the big criticism we hear of qualitative research and critical methods is that it's biased because it's very much based around a person's experience, self-perception, things like that. And that it's not rigorous in the sense that it doesn't have the same kinds of quality control mechanisms. It just has different ones. And those qualitative and critical paradigms recognize subjectivity and bias and those things and acknowledges them, versus some of our more empirical methods that pretend like they're not there, but they're still there.
So one thing that comes to mind, I'm new to this. I'm new to participatory action research. I'm just learning it. But as I was reading about it, it was coming in and out of favor since I think the 50s. And it seemed to come into favor during times of turmoil or change or activism, the cases where you could see a clear need. And that's kind of where we are now, right? We're at this inflection point in higher ed. So this seems to me an ideal time for more people to at least engage in the practice. And I don't know if that results in wins, quote unquote, but the more people who do it, and the more it's connected to a change movement in some way. So like Chris's research to me is perfect for this. Just looking at changes in higher ed generally is perfect for this. I don't know if that would make it more acceptable, or if it's just going to come in favor again for a little while and then go out of favor again. I don't know.
So let me just jump in real quick. I need to jump off shortly, but I think what it reminds me of is the dichotomy that happened between quantitative and qualitative, and how that was a shift, a paradigm shift that actually had to happen. And I think for me, because my PhD is in ed leadership, I got exposed to action research very early, but I think that as administrators, we can do a better job of creating opportunities for scholars, you know, doctoral students. I'd love to have innovation fellows that come and work with us on some of this research to have, you know, greater access. And I think that we need to also partner with institutions at different levels, research ones, I mean, all levels, to really be able to engage more deeply in this. And so I think that's the thing that's missing.
Agreed.
Thanks for having me.
Bye,
Thanks, Christy.
Bye, thanks, Christy.
So one of the books that I read in my doctoral studies that I thought was really helpful was The Qualitative Manifesto by Norman Denson, where he actually goes through the history. And any of Norman Denson's stuff, he actually goes through the history of some of these paradigm shifts, these movements. And I think you're right that he does talk a bit about how they relate to broader societal changes and how and so right now, you know, a big movement has been the evidence movement, right? The evidence-based medicine, evidence-based education, and he talks a bit about the other side of that pendulum, right? The other swing and how that works. And I was reading, there's a book now. Crap, I'll have to look at I'll have to tweet it out. Where it's a pushback on evidence-based medicine, and it's called narrative medicine. And it's again kind of pulling back and saying, you know what, evidence-based medicine only gets us so far. It takes us away from the stories that really drive medical progress from a place of care.
The Wounded Storyteller by Arthur Frank,
okay.
I think is the one you're talking about.
Yeah. I'll tell these and tweet them out. That'd be great. Also, ASU is doing an action lab that you might pay attention to. It's a little more connected to ed tech product cycles, but it's the same methodology. So it might be worth a dig into who's doing that work and how well it's working.
So just an anecdote from the UK is that the Higher Education Academy, in its different fellowships streams, requires an action research project as part of the application and achieving those fellowships as well. So it's really becoming quite embedded in certainly in teaching, because it's such a good way of looking at teaching, and yeah.
Yep.
But I don't know if you have the same sort of things here in America. I've only just moved here. I'm feeling like a stranger.
I'd say that for you.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we've had some viewers. So there's been lots of comments on Twitter as well. I think we're coming to a nice moment to call this a day. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and the sun is now coming. No, it's not sun. I have to say, it's not sun. It's really cloudy, misty, rainy day out there in Washington State. So there you go. We're a typical Washington morning, I think.
We're having a beautiful day in Santa Clara, so the sun is out on this end of this far south.
Nice here.
Yeah, I'm very happy. I'm heading to Santa Cruz next month, beginning of next week. So if anybody's there, I'll be looking forward to seeing and connecting with people there as well. So.
Well, thank you.
Anybody?
Nice,
any last
nice
words
to hang out
from
with
anyone?
y'all.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks.
Okay.
Fine. Thank you.
Okay, I'm stopping.